Good morning, everyone. Welcome to my session. I'm actually very proud of this session. This is one of the pieces of information collateral I've been working on for quite a while. My name is Frank Simerja. I'm with Trustworthy Computing at Microsoft. My primary responsibility over the past year has been to try to create a awareness about cloud adoption and cloud readiness. How and what are the skills needed for you to be able to actually take just general cloud adoption back to your management and actually translate that information in a very simple way. So today I'll spend the next hour or so talking about and showing you a tool that I created a little while ago that's publicly available. It's not really representative of Microsoft. It's actually designed to be a non-biased means for you to be able to communicate that information back to your executives. So since it's a pretty small group, I can ask this. How many of you have some kind of a role that's both technical and compliance-based, or something to do with associating those two sides together? And occasionally you have to try to talk to your management and convince them that this is maybe a good thing or a bad thing. Right? Yeah, okay. So those are sometimes some of the challenges that I think most of us face. And it's remarkable that there is very little information, at least maybe what I'll say is I've found very little information that's easily accessible that conveys that to management. Management reads an article and they say, hey, this is great, or oh my God, this is scary. Leaves a big gap because you still have to get your job done, right? So one of the things that I'll spend time now showing you and discussing is this whole concept of how you can actually bridge that gap with a relatively simple process, a simple effort to actually deliver a message to your management that they will understand. Already lost one person. That's a bad sign. Trustworthy Computing, a little bit about what we do. We are a team within Microsoft that represents security, privacy, reliability. Our role is not to promote, not really to sell product, even though I work for Microsoft, so obviously we're all here listening to Microsoft sessions. Our team, however, focuses on a cross-organization message. What we do is we try to actually help anybody adopt Microsoft capabilities or actually cloud capabilities or product capabilities. A long time we spent effort creating processes such as the secure development lifecycle, for instance. If you've developed code, you're probably using it, I hope. You're using SDL, somebody out here? Just, yeah, maybe. I even have a t-shirt. If you tell me you're using SDL, I'll give you a t-shirt for that. So if your customers are using SDL, I will still give you a t-shirt. That still benefits a t-shirt. Well, if you're not familiar with it, read up on it, because you should at least be familiar with secure development. It's a great concept and capability that Microsoft offers. So a little bit about my organization, now a little bit about cloud computing. So a little straw poll run not so long ago, run by Wakefield Research. Generally, the concept is that most people don't know what cloud computing is. Hopefully you do. But did you know that half of the respondents believe that bad weather will affect cloud computing? So next time, you can blame cloud computing on bad weather. Fortunately, here, I don't think you get a lot of bad weather, right? Amazon would disagree with me. I'm sure Amazon would highly disagree with me. But you know what? This is an independent poll. So out of those respondents, also, half of them indicated they've never used it. But the reality is that 97% of them, so bulk of them, are using some kind of a shopping experience, banking experience, social networking capability. What I thought was interesting is I still don't understand where the last 3% are on the planet. They must be isolated somewhere. Because this survey, I'm sure, was an electronic survey. So doesn't that automatically make it 100%? I don't know. That's an interesting little thing to think about. So what is cloud computing? This is the general terminology that I utilize when I think about cloud computing. Is very similar to how NIST identifies the 5 different elements that you can identify. The difference between just running servers in your environment or just saying, well, it sounds like old-style mainframes. But the distinction element is that it has broad network access, resource pooling, rapid elasticity, self-service, and measured service. The three models that we tend to also associate right away with, and I think most of the presentations today have revolved, or this past week, have revolved around some kind of infrastructure, a platform, or a software as a service. Anybody disagree with that so far? If you disagree and have a good reason, I'll give you another t-shirt. See, because it's a small group, I can do that. Come on, really? Okay, no disagreement. So that means I must be on the right track. The presenter's on the right track. That's a good thing. So what are the risks and rewards associated with that? The benefits of cloud computing is scalability, agility, flexibility, and cost reductions, right? That's at least what you've been told so far. Generally, I think I would have to agree with those principles. They do actually bring things to you. They reduce your costs, especially that's what management keeps saying is, hey, can I save money? Ultimately, the answer is you should be able to save money if you deploy it correctly. The concerns, though, that also come along with this, and I think that's, I'm hoping, why you're here, are items associated with privacy, reliability, and security. Now, most of the time, security, I think, bubbles to the top. Is it secure? Can I meet my compliance needs? Because it is cloud computing a secure environment. The answer to that is that cloud providers, traditionally, and the punchline is, do provide a very secure environment. But there's a perception problem. And the perception is that cloud providers may not be able to deliver that. And part of that perception problem is, where do the responsibilities lay? Are the responsibilities something that a provider is responsible for, or you as a consumer of that cloud provider fit into place? What you're seeing here right now are the layers associated, when this is not the ISO layers, so these layers are basically the key elements associated with cloud adoption. Data classification, client and end user access point, and identity and access management are on the top three, and they tend to lay most of the time in your space. That's the thing that you ultimately will own regardless of how much you utilize a cloud provider. If you use an identity manager, if you use some form of a domain distribution like Active Directory in the cloud, somebody's trying to come in on this side too. All of those elements will still belong to you as the individual consumer. The providers, though, can actually help you in the long run by taking away some of the low-level items, such as physical network security and host security, securing the environment. A lot of those things you'll see in the infrastructure as a service, but the benefits grow and the risks get reduced from your side as you move into a software as a service platform. So what are the benefits of cloud? One is time, two is saving money, and three is improved security. At least, again, based on this survey, those are the three elements associated with the benefits of cloud adoption. Interestingly enough, what are the barriers? Security, standards, and transparency. So there's a real dichotomy. Security is both a benefit and a disadvantage. Now, the question is, how do you get that message back to management that security may be something that you can manage through just adequate understanding of some of the business issues associated with that? And again, that's where I'm looking to try to help you empower some of the basic principles of where's your environment currently, how can you improve your people, process, and technology, and could you reduce some of these issues with cloud computing? My answer is yes. The Cloud Security Readiness Tool, I created this about a year ago, and I've been working very closely in alliance with the Cloud Security Alliance. So everybody know who the CSA is? Please say yes. If you don't, please talk to me, because this is an association that is not Microsoft. It's a nonprofit organization. It's worldwide. They have offices pretty much everywhere. In fact, I was in Singapore doing this similar presentation. Interestingly enough, for Asia, our Asia market is extremely concerned about cloud and cloud adoption, much more than this audience, for instance, in size, because they are just ravenous to understand how can they adopt cloud capabilities. And I'll show you some stats that, and interestingly enough, contradict the interest level, because of the stats that I've been collecting over a little while, really doesn't actually show indicative behavior there. Now they have become kind of a generally accepted trust factor for cloud, as far as cloud authority goes. Again, if you're not familiar with them, I'd strongly recommend it's cloudsecurityalliance.org. Microsoft is a partner. So are many, many other large CSPs, and now more or less a lot of customers. So one of the things that was interesting is to see organizations like Coca-Cola and Amgen, I believe BP recently. So if you represent those organizations, you're already a member. Target, who else? I'm just thinking of big organizations I've seen on the list, and this is public information, nothing private there. One of the key knowledge elements that the Cloud Security Alliance created is the Cloud Control Matrix. The Cloud Control Matrix is a set of control elements. There's, in fact, 98 of them. That's designed for cloud readiness, cloud adoption. If you want to know what are the key elements that a cloud provider should be able to provide you, the CCM will probably address those issues. Does it address something like, is your password strong enough? No. But it asks you more general questions about, for instance, data stewardship, or disposal, or policy management. So the fundamentals that really need to be in place for you to be successful, both in-house and in the cloud. Keeping in mind that the Cloud Control Matrix is designed for CSPs, for the providers, such as Microsoft, to actually go through and tell you how we're doing. And that information is actually also available on the Cloud Security Alliance website. How does this play into the capabilities I was talking about? So I created a tool that's called the Cloud Security Readiness Tool. It's freely available off the Microsoft website. It asks you to go through a set of questions, and we'll go through this real quickly. I'll show you how quick it is to go through this effort, and the benefits of that, based on the report, is where are you currently? How can you adopt and move forward? And that's based on a principle of a 4-stage maturity model. And some of you may be familiar with maturity models. This one is not following any official model. It's much more simple. The language by design is designed to be created so that even if you're not 100% sure you understand where you fit, that's pretty funny. Where are you today? Where can you be tomorrow? And more importantly, how can you potentially alleviate some of those risks associated there with cloud services that can actually move that risk level down? So I'm sure every one of you, well, let me rephrase this. All of you should be concerned about the risk exposure of your organization. Ultimately, the question is, can a provider, Microsoft or maybe another provider, such as Amazon, for instance, can they actually reduce your risk? The answers inside the report will actually provide you some of those very clear, distinct guidances that not only is written for you, but it's also written for your management. The report that comes out of it, and since I won't spend time looking at the report, we'll look at the tool briefly, is where are you today? So it actually addresses that current state, simple language associated with that. Recommendations on what capabilities you could enhance, and what are the ones that are, according to industry norm, items that you should be looking at. So particularly here, we're looking at the equipment support contract. And I'm sure all of you have a really robust support contract in place, right? Equipment that's in your server room is maintained and it's upgraded regularly, and you replace the, no, yeah, maybe, sometimes, all right. And what's the advantages of utilizing a cloud provider? This is by far one of those areas where you can actually see a cloud provider can actually help your organization out very effectively. By not having to, you don't have to maintain an equipment contract. You can actually rely on your provider's ability to do that. Last bit that the report generates, and we'll be looking at trends here a little bit. As I said, it's kind of like the lead into the report before I actually do the report, are control standards. The report actually provides you control mapping based on these different standards. So if you see a standard here that actually applies to you, you can actually get the report to auto-generate the information for those controls. think about a consulting opportunity where you bring in somebody who actually lists out all the controls that you need to be concerned about. This report, which, as I said, is about 15 minutes to go through, and we'll go through it in a minute here, generates for you, and the results are provided based on those control matrix. Any control standards that you see maybe missing on this list, or may feel that should be added? As some industries, I know, for instance, education, I know education has spoken up before saying, hey, you know what, you missed us. FERPA? Yeah. Keep adding more. As a result, we'll cover some of those areas. And there's no question that there's a benefit to having more and more of these. And that's something that will be addressed in future editions of the tool, in fact. All right, real quickly, let me walk you through a tool demo, since everybody likes to do demos, and I love to do demos. And I'll show you how simple this process is. And as said, you can go back, run this yourself, and if you have a positive result from using the tool, let me know. If you have a negative result, please let me know even faster, because I'm really curious to know if this helps you convince anybody within your organization. I won't even say convince, if it helps you in your organization to be able to advance utilizing cloud services. So what you're saying is that Office 365 wasn't aware of this tool. That's unfortunate, because we, it's the typical, the only thing I could say about that is that we're an organization of 80,000 people, and this is one of those typical problems I face, is that I'm actually spending more time educating our internal organizations. And you're right, I mean, they should be more aware of that. And if this helps, that's a great thing to say, hey, did you hear about that? I heard about it in TechEd. That one seems small, so this one seems a little bigger. That really didn't go very far. Right. So that's definitely a much more technical discussion beyond the point of what the purpose of this tool is. The design of this is to actually, comes back to, if you're looking for that information, you're already having a great conversation with the Office team. The reality is, frequently the question that I have is, are you asking the right questions? Is your organization, have they established themselves in a way so that you actually know what you're trying to classify? Understanding the fact that you need to have a classification program in place. So that's fantastic. You're considerably further along than most organizations are. All right, real briefly, let me go through this. Principles here is that you can pick the organization that you represent as far as a sector goes. So for instance, here I pick retail, and I can barely see the text there. Location, so here we'll pick North America. We'll go through the next one and pick a workload that we're interested in. So for instance, we'll pick communication and messaging. Next item would be the organization size. So I'll place myself in the kind of in the center point there. And notice that by default, the tool has already pre-populated the workload element. Here we're looking at software as a service, and PCI was the default regulatory body that pre-selected. But I could, at this point, choose a different one. I'm maybe a little bit more interested in ANISA and the German BSI. This is, again, great for European agencies and European customers that may be interested in moving to the cloud. The questionnaire process goes through, identifies based on 5 categories. So here we're looking at policy design. And I'm not going to bore you through the process of reading out each one of these questions. That's your job to do after the session. But I'll go through and pick some values based on, I'd say, on the low end of the result spectrum. Because most organizations, I feel, especially here, we're dealing with policy. Policy management, policy updates, policy review process. And since I can't read the text from way back here, I have to kind of remember what the questions are just from the back of using this tool so many times. Moving on to the next category is physical security. This is about your physical infrastructure and the security levels associated with that. I'm going to read at least a couple of questions. So, for instance, the first one on the top there is organization role access by role. How is the organization actually assign access based on particular role controls? And where's the mouse? So I'll say that physical access is managed by role, and then what we'll say on the next two is we'll follow the same line up here, go just down at that. We're making progress in the organization. Next category we look at is privacy-related management issues. Warranty, data classification, that's the one I mentioned, is most organizations really don't have a good understanding of what data classification should look like. I'd say that best example of that is if you look at on the getting started space, operating system level control mechanisms are what most organizations actually have. So my disk is protected because I have certain rights set up on it. That would be classified as a very, very entry-level place because you're not really classifying your data. You're pretty much just kind of allowing it. It's a very ad hoc mechanism. And that's probably the language that most of the time you're familiar with is just approaching this ad hoc or on demand. So moving on to the next category area, we'll take a look at here at risk management. Hopefully all of you have done some kind of a risk discovery in your organization to one capacity or another. Questions that are associated with this is, how is that risk management program in place? How are you executing it? Are assets, for instance, manually recorded? Do you have a centralized database for managing and controlling your assets? Those are some of the principles associated with this that organizations need to consider. Now, we're only going through 27 controls out of the 100 that the Cloud Control Matrix has, but this is a cross-section of the controls that are probably the most applicable to most organizations. Resilience management. As I said, if you don't have enough time to read through all of this stuff, I just recommend you go to it. I just want to kind of give you a walkthrough, just to show you what the effort of going through this process is. It's super lightweight. So we're just about done. In fact, we're, I think, only a handful of questions away from, less than 10 questions away from completing it. Here we're dealing with resilience management. By far one of the areas that I think most organizations can benefit from cloud services. The ability to have a resilient environment, having data centers that you don't have to own, having hot failovers instead of cold failovers, for instance. So again, I'll go through and I'll say that my organization, since I started with Microsoft in the title, has matured a little bit more in this space. Now, these answers are not representative of my company, and I will not attest to the fact that I answered correctly for Microsoft. Security architecture, areas that are a little bit more indicative of physical security that most organizations are familiar with. This includes segmentation, firewalls, some of the more fundamental associations associated with that organizations are familiar with. Here we'll say that we've actually made some great progress. And that's the last questions. So now I hit next, and I can generate my report. That was really hard, right? So now you have a report that's generated from the tool. That report is something that you can actually take piecemeal or in its entirety over to somebody who actually, through that conversation process of, is cloud services going to reduce my potential risk? Well, one of the things that this information has resulted is some usage-based information. And that's where I'm now going to shift into. This is where the cloud trends. And if you didn't receive one of these, it's just a pamphlet that kind of gives you an impression of what are some of the biggest risks and the best improvements in cloud adoption according to the trend information that we've discovered. This trend information consists of 4 areas I'd like to cover. The top and bottom, government and military, nonprofit, which also represents, in my categorization, as education. So if you represent any type of education organization, you're kind of lumped into this category. Since the data is anonymized, and I'll talk about anonymous data in a little bit. I know there are some risks associated with that, but the data is anonymized since we scrub all this information. It really is just the results. Education got lumped into nonprofit. That was just a artifact, I guess, of the way the data is collected. And then what are some of the regulations that are most used in the tool currently? This report can be downloaded from Microsoft.com Trusted Cloud, and I'll show you the link in a minute. The data was collected between October 2012 and represents data right in through March 2013. When I say approximately 5,700 people have gone through and utilized the tool, one of the advantages that we have is that we've seen the margin of error is extremely low. I'd say that the only place where we ended up with a margin of error that some of the information, sometimes I'd even question, was in the Asian market. And those questions, in fact, you'll see the Asian bars will be missing. That's by design, just because the error level is high enough that it's not worth actually talking about it. So I didn't ignore Asian markets. It's just that the margin of error was high enough that it wasn't really worth discussing. So to the punchline here, and if you were to leave, this is it. This is the information that you need to know, is that most organizations have antivirus and anti-malware software deployed in relatively well-organized fashion. Most organizations have figured out that they need this. Great, that's fantastic. This is really good news for you, I hope. Now, on the other side, we also see a couple of other things. There's facility security. So we're talking about particularly access to data based by role. And the second one is clock synchronization. Like in that one, I was thinking that's kind of an odd one that would be something most organizations have adopted centralized. But the principle behind that is not just that you're using an NTP server, but you actually have some kind of a mechanism in place to ensure that all your clocks are synchronized and checked on a more regular basis. So quick show of hands, would you consider your organizations leading in these areas, that you've got some level of controlled access, clock synchronization, antivirus, deployment that's centralized, managed, and controlled? Yeah, okay. I would have expected more hands because according to the results, you are actually much more mature. On the flip side of this, interestingly enough, hiring practices. So the beauty about the control matrix is that it doesn't ask just purely technical controls. It also addresses human resources and legal issues too. So prudent hiring practices in most organizations tends to be something that's a problem. Now we'll talk about the level of a problem here in a bit. Efficient capacity management. I think that this is by far one of the biggest issues associated with most organizations is their ability to manage their organization's capacity planning, actually being able to predict where they need to be tomorrow. One of the biggest advantages of how a cloud provider, especially based on elastic computing, being able to grow into that space very effectively and quickly. Incident response and incident management. The issues associated with not having a properly managed incident response environment is that, again, you have your building burned down or your facility broken into. What is your response behavior? I haven't even talked about what happens when your data is stolen from under you or somebody breaks in. Do you have to go through some form of disclosure? In the United States, most states now have some form of disclosure agreement in place that you have to actually disclose to the public that your data was leaked. Hopefully most of you are aware, especially if you're complying with any type of regulatory agency. Maybe? Yeah? You know about that? Yeah, I hope so. All right. Before I jump into the next slide, which talks about the stats, just so you understand how these 4 stages, throughout the rest of the slides, you'll see there's a maturity element associated with it. It comes back to the maturity questions. Now here's what's actually happening underneath the hood. Getting started represents kind of an undocumented, very reactive state. Making progress means that at least there's some basic understanding, collective behavior associated with your organization's ability to follow trends. The almost there and streamlined represent organizations that have actually established a well-measured process, starting with the fact that they're using a program at a relatively minimal level on the almost there, and streamlines means that you audit most of the time. You audit and you have a repeatable process. Repeatability becomes one of the most important things if you've done an audit recently. Repeatability is one of the most important things to be able to show evidence of. I could do it this. I could show you that I met these control compliance issues, and I can repeat it in 3 months. So knowing the fact that those 4 stages, you'll see that throughout the rest of this presentation, one of the exercises we went through is to take a look at those values on the 27 questions. So you see at the bottom here, we have the list of the 27 questions, and we provided a scale of +1, -1 based on the first 2 stages and the second 2 stages. And this comes back to what I showed you as far as the summary goes. One is that we see this item right here, which represents the antivirus, anti-malware. That's where we see the best and most adopted elements associated with capabilities. The other 3 that I want to point out are this one, and this one, representing human resources, information security, incident management, and capacity planning. As you see, they're the worst offenders as far as organizations' ability to be able to move forward. The details associated with that look like this. In any malware, in the 4 stages, we see that on the getting started space, this is by far the smallest element, especially when we look at worldwide. Less than 20% of organizations are in an ad hoc state. I'd consider, I've looked at this data a little bit more in detail too, as to what are the organizational sizes that represent that space. What we see there are a lot of times the smaller businesses. Businesses below, I'd say 50 computers. Organizations with larger deployments tend to actually have made a lot more maturing behavior moving up the scale. Now, it's good for you that you know that your organization's like this. It's also good to know that the partners that you work with probably have some kind of an antivirus and anti-malware solution in place. So you can actually see that fact that this block right here has some really great maturity behavior. Interestingly enough, in Europe, they've hit that 40% mark. Next time I present this, I'm hoping to actually be able to talk about the difference between what I talk to you about now and what we see maybe in 6 months from now. So the goal is to actually be able to track to see what kind of adoption behaviors are occurring. All right, so on the flip side, on the upside, it's easy to talk about, hey, good stuff. But really, here are the areas that your organization should also be concerned about, just like everyone else in the market. We see employment agreement. So what does an employment agreement consist of? This is the agreement when you join the company. This is partially included with this is some kind of form of a non-disclosure agreement. Everybody has probably signed one with your company, right? You have an NDA. Let me ask you this. When's the last time you had to update it? Do you even know if your human resources department has filed it? Do you know if it's filed in a way that they could retrieve it? So if you say yes to those things, bravo. Reality is most organizations don't really know what happens with that NDA once it's signed. So of course, from a legal perspective, it's a very complex problem potentially for your company to have a discussion maybe if there's some kind of a disagreement associated with that. What if you have a disagreement with some of the language inside of it? Can you just sign a new one? These are questions that you should consider. I know I actually started thinking about what does that mean if I ever have to update my NDA? I don't think I really have much recourse in my organization. At least I don't think I do. Most organizations see this space as highly immature. Particularly, one of the things that I thought was interesting is this stack right here. It's like we're looking at almost 45% in the Asian market. You see that they consider themselves as a very ad hoc. And when I consider ad hoc means that maybe they had a piece of paper, it was signed by somebody, and it was filed somewhere. Benefits of being able to, again, have more mature environments is being able to manage the process from cradle to grave. Number 21 is capacity planning. This one is by far one of the more interesting ones, I think, when we think about, are organizations able to plan for growth? The general answer is not very well. The combination of, again, that first and second grouping here, we see that just shy of 80% of organizations have a very basic rudimentary ability to do capacity planning. And when I'm talking about 80%, I'm looking at the two worldwide stacks there. The combination of that tends to tell me that the way you do capacity planning is when you need more server space, you go and buy it. Sounds right? No? Yeah? Maybe? Hopefully you have a more advanced process than what I just described, but according to the information that we've discovered, it's not the case. And more so, again, when we look at Asian responses closer to well above that rate, we're actually talking about just shy of 60% of organizations do not have a formalized mechanism in place to be able to grow. Incident response. So who's familiar with a black swan? Nobody? Oh, two. And I have 2 shirts left. All right, well, if you tell me what a black swan is, I'll give you a shirt. Close. All right, I'd give it to you. Yeah, fair enough. All right, well, I'm not going to throw this, so I'm going to leave it right here, and because I know I would never even remotely make it. Now, hopefully one of these is big enough for you, and if it's not, you're going to have to give it to one of your family members, right? There's an extra large over here. There you go. So one of the realities associated with what a black swan is an unpredictable behavior and being able to test for it. So the truth is that cloud providers test for black swans. That's the process of something very, very unusual, unpredictable, such as a major outage, both physically or a security outage where you have a data leakage that's extremely large. Providers do go through the exercise of testing that. And if they have an incident response team that knows how to properly accelerate the behaviors associated with that, they can mitigate and provide a response behavior both to prevent, manage, and recover, as well as make sure that the right people know the right bits of information associated with that. Question I have is, have you in any recent time tried to do some black swan activity? This would entail, you don't tell anybody that you've had a major outage, and basically you go through the pretend process of all your servers are down. Who's going to react? What's the reaction that you're expecting at that point? You know, your hair's on fire. Oh my God, our servers just went down. What's the response? Oh my God, our servers went down, right? I mean, that's probably the response you're going to get. You definitely want to consider the fact that incident response is a little bit more complex than that. You need to have something that actually says, okay, we had a failure. Here's what our action plan is. This is how we're going to execute against it. The respondents of our survey indicate that most organizations do not have a response plan in place. In fact, I would predict that these organizations, if they had some kind of a major catastrophic event, there's a high likeliness that they would just fail. Not a really good scenario. So how does a cloud provider help in that process? Well, it's all about trying to then eliminate some of that risk, shifting it so that maybe some of that information that was stored in a cloud service isn't something that you're going to be responsible for managing. I was at a customer site recently where they had it was, I think, citywide power outage. I'm not too sure the scope of how far the power outage went. It was kind of interesting to sit in the boardroom talking about this particular slide as the lights are blinking on and off. Thinking, first question I asked, so where's your data center? And they point to a wall thinking, okay, it's right next door. So it's backed up with power supplies, right? That's good. You got a generator? Fantastic. But the bottom line is if that power outage lasts for more than maybe a couple of hours, how big is their tank? Maybe it can go for 8 hours? And then what? I guess their business goes offline at that point? I'm not too sure about you, but most organizations don't do well when they go offline quite to that capacity. Now, since I never got the timer turned on, I have absolutely no idea what time it is. And he's not telling me so. All right, industry-based trends for government and military organizations. This subsegment has some interesting trends behavior that I wanted to share with you. First of all, when you think about governments and military, especially let's think of the United States, do you think that they have data classification under control? Yeah? I think that they should have data classification under control. Reality is, the respondents indicate the fact that data classification is a major problem. So these are the organizations that are supposed to have this cap down, have a really good understanding of how to classify and organize data. Clearly, that's not the case. Notice here, am I missing the Asian stack on this one? Yeah. Asian stack's missing just because of, again, the error, level of error inside the response just didn't merit being able to add that. But based on a worldwide and North American European perspective, we see that, in fact, European respondents indicated that just shy of 60% of organizations don't have an adequate data classification model. We're talking about ad hoc. I classify what I need to when I need to. Which raises a question is, when you think about ANISA or PCI, I believe data classification, as in I know what my PII is mandatory. Seems like this is slightly contrary to that understanding. At least when I see this information, I definitely think about the fact that, right, when I look at that stack, I really wonder what exactly is going on with those organizations that they don't have good data classification capabilities in place. All right, a couple other things associated with this is operational management. So on the operational management side, we see resource planning and equipment maintenance. So there's kind of a common theme. I keep coming back to these questions only because they tend to be some of the ones that I consider the most important associated with a lot of these organizations. And interestingly enough, when I kind of combine the resource planning associated with government agencies, not such a rosy picture. Wonder if next time I update my driver's license, whether they'll actually have the ability to store that information in their environment, or whether the equipment will be up to date enough to be able to store and it won't go down in the long term, right? We're talking about equipment maintenance numbers of 70% of organizations have no proper plan in place. And to be honest with you, last time I went into some government agencies, I have seen some devices that I wonder whether they should still exist. So this also comes back to the question is, are you running Windows XP? I'm sure you've heard the fact that you should probably not be running Windows XP, right? For more reasons than one. It's a little old. It's also difficult to maintain at this point. Yeah, no, maybe, kind of. All right, so now for another sector that I think is extremely interesting is the nonprofit. This, as I said, also includes the educational organizations as a whole. And when we take a look at the information associated with this, number one that popped out is resilience management. Nonprofits have a staggering amount of low maturity rate, otherwise ad hoc, on resilience management. This includes organizations that we rely on when we think about nonprofits, right? So you think about your church or your bank, your church or a nonprofit like UNICEF or your school. Resilience is not something that most of these organizations think ahead of. At a staggering, it's mind-blowing level that they don't actually think about this. This is close to 80% of these organizations that have not done any planning. In fact, the planning level on resilience is so low on the advanced stage that I wonder where this money is going. And thinking about nonprofits, it starts making sense because they don't spend money on these issues, right? Resilience, being able to have a resilient environment is an expensive effort. If you're a nonprofit or you're a school, are you going to spend money on making sure that your environment has the ability to stay resilient? Or are you going to just spend buying more equipment? Or is it the fact that you're buying a lot of old equipment that already has failed the ability to be resilient? And equipment location. North American nonprofits and educational institutions represent 80% of organizations that state that they have basically an ad hoc way of deploying servers. So that means every time those servers end up under a desk represents one more tick inside that column. This is the equipment that should probably be in a data center. It should probably be somewhere where that it's backed up. I worked with a biotech for a little while, and the executive that also happened to be the chief science officer, that I think he self-appointed himself that, ran an access database underneath his desk. Now, at the time, he was doing genome discovery. Really clever. I come in. He says, you know, I have all this really important research on my machine. What should I do with it? At the time, he was also running it on Access. So it was a little bit of an interesting process of saying, well, you know, you should probably be running on SQL. All right, I can install that. And I think within 24 hours, he had SQL running on that machine. Power failure, so that same scenario, all you need is that he said, this executive said that I have important information, so keyword important information, on my machine. Well, did he have a UPS? Oh, well, all right, forget it. He had a machine under his desk. That's it, period. That was the answer for his ability to do research. Certainly didn't address power failure issues. Again, that device fails. When's the last time you pulled a power plug out of a SQL server and have to hope that it comes back online after you power it back up? I know SQL is much more resilient than it used to be, but I'm thinking of days when you pulled a power on a SQL server. At that point, you're really praying that those tables had some level of integrity that it come back online. And then last one is, again, this constant message coming back to this whole concept of incident response. These organizations fail to have any type of adequate incident management or incident response capabilities. So when you take a look at the stack associated with just this ad hoc state, the question actually is phrased very specifically for this, is that what happens if you lose, potentially you have your laptop stolen? So my laptop has lots and lots of very valuable information to me on it. Luckily, I don't have any PII information on it. But let's pretend that Mr. Executive decided to, or some IT pro that's really smart is going to do some munging of data, and it's a little bit more sensitive. That device is stolen. Could that could that event have been the demise of that organization? For some, I think that's the case. Having a plan in place, at least to be able to manage it, is the next question. Will that organization actually be able to recover from such event like that? And then the last thing we'll kind of ease into toward, this is, and since I have absolutely no idea where we are on time, 9:44? All right, well, 24. All right, well, we're almost done here, so that's good for you and good for me. No, I mean, it's good for you, right? Regulation distribution, when we take a look at what are the regulations that are most adopted and most used, clearly what we see is in North America, ISO 27001, 2005, lots of numbers. This is the most common regulatory body that organizations are actually being impacted by at one level or another. And if you don't realize it, odds are that this is the regulation that also most cloud providers are also addressing. The good news is that Microsoft has its 27001 2005 certification. So if you choose Azure or O365, you can actually get this information from Microsoft for your purposes. It's attestation, which is what you ultimately require. And in Europe, ANISA is the predominant mechanism that's utilized by most organizations as a means to check for compliance and regulatory capabilities. All right, I wanted to shift the thought on one little thing. I always thought this is kind of one of those great little anecdotal stories to talk about is big data. Since the more I play with big data, the more I deal with it, one of the things that always kind of came to mind is, what does that actually mean? What's the impact of big data? So for those of you that knows the story, great. For those of you that don't, hopefully this will kind of give you a little bit of insight of something that I always thought was interesting. So what does unscented lotion, calcium, and zinc have in common? Last shirt. So a major retailer in North America found a relationship between these three items. It was a really interesting relationship. In fact, one of the things that they did is they started sending coupons based on that relationship. They created an index, a scale, called a pregnancy scale. Turns out that when you find women starting to purchase, I'm sorry, I'm picking on women, unscented lotion, calcium, and zinc, you've got a higher ratio that those women have an early stage pregnancy. We're talking about first trimester. This retailer happened to discover this through mining their own information. They actually realized that, and they were able to very quickly and effectively send coupons out to individuals that they felt have this high pregnancy scale. So the story goes is a father writes the retailer and says, "My daughter got this in the mail, the coupons." He said, "She's still in high school, and you're sending her coupons for baby clothes and cribs. Are you trying to encourage her to get pregnant?" Excellent customer service. The result is, on the phone after the father called back, said, "I had a talk with my daughter. It turns out she's had some activity in the house, and I haven't been completely aware of. She's due in August." So what can I do? I think the key takeaways I'd recommend you take a look at Microsoft.com/trustedcloud. The tool is available there. The report is. Everything is pretty much brought together. In fact, a lot of our capabilities with our products, the STAR registry information from the Cloud Security Alliance is also available on that site. All these elements that's the fastest way to get that. And if you came in after I did the walk around and handed these out, you're more than welcome to grab one of them. It's basically just a real quick, brief summary of the top elements that I talked about and the top threats. It's pretty too, and it's on glossy paper, and it's light. You don't have to stuff your suitcase with too much stuff. And then, of course, the standard resource slides. So I'll take questions at this time. If you have any, it's a small enough group. Please feel free. You know, you're all family now, and you know what my passion is, so I can share your passion.
Can you just explain a little bit about where the tool came from, the tool you put together, what went into developing that structure, that process?
I love the question. Where did the tool come from? It came from here and working with the Cloud Security Alliance. Primarily, this is the build-off of the Cloud Control Matrix. The Cloud Control Matrix is designed for auditors. It's great if you understand control language. The problem is at first, when I went through this exercise, I noticed that most of the people that are trying to consume and digest this information, if you look at the responses, the other element, the other resources, it's called the STAR. It's the trust registry that is offered by the Cloud Security Alliance. Microsoft for Azure, O365, and Dynamics has submitted publicly available comments. These are the disclosure elements associated with those controls. So you can read up on how is Microsoft doing based on those controls. Turns out you can read the Box one. You can read other providers. In fact, Amazon's listed there too. The principle is that when you read through this, it should make you smarter to knowing what exactly is going on. How will that provider be able to provision your particular issues? One big problem with it is the language tends to be still a little bit arcane. It's auditor specific. So if you're an auditor, you'll get great benefit out of it. If you're not an auditor, you'll probably not get such great benefit out of it. The tool tries to bridge that gap. Bring that language down a little bit.
Thanks.
What role does the provider play in trying to prepare customers for a move to the cloud? Trying to to make them go through a matrix like this? I mean, clearly Microsoft's got theirs.
Mhm.
Just
So how does a cloud provider facilitate some of these conversations?
well, I mean, because you're going to end up mutually beneficial if
Correct.
you've gone through this maturity.
So this effort is something that I've been trying to promote for that exact purpose, is that how do we get providers more aware and how do we get customers more aware to bring them to that common conversation. Providers right now that are participating with the Cloud Security Alliance are discovering the fact that there's actually some really well-built models that are already provisioned and provided by the Cloud Security Alliance. Also recommend that organizations should join the CSA and be a member of it. One of the things to look out for are other regulations such as ISO, FISMA, FERPA, you name it. There is now the ability to, if you're familiar with a SAS 70, you can actually ask now for a SAS 70 plus CSA, which actually includes this matrix. So it's a common language, common mapping. You can actually ask for that plus. So CSA has successfully wedged its way into a lot of these associations or regulatory bodies. And it's happening in Europe quite extensively, too. Yes, sir?
I was just going to say that I think that one of the issues that I see with your data, with all the very high levels of just getting started, a lot of those are areas that Microsoft is really lacking in, as far as providing services or providing a means to manage those areas. And I think if your tool would not, when they're filling this out, to point them at Microsoft resources, it would also be very helpful because a lot of them are just not advertised.
Two separate problems is the resources and information available. Keep in mind the tool is designed to be company agnostic. By design, it doesn't point back to Microsoft. So in a way, its Achilles heel is it's not going to sell you product. I don't try to promote Microsoft capabilities. In fact, that's why I said is the CSA is so, they like this so much because of the fact that I don't. So if you were to even use this capability, go through it before you adopt an Amazon service or a Google service, the responses should be the same. We do have trust centers for our products. Currently, they lack a lot of clarity, and we are in the process of trying to increase the information associated with this. So it's a little bit clearer how those particular controls are addressed. Yes, sir? It's online in a cloud provider that I found that actually is again, not a Microsoft solution. There is no offline edition. I use, as I said, the Cloud Control Matrix. There is no real easy way to bring this offline because the results, again, once you go through it, you'll understand that the report is really the piece that you're trying to walk away with. And customizing that report is the element that you want to deliver to the individuals that you're trying to communicate with. And that is a PDF doc. Right. Yeah, there's levels of paranoia that maybe we can't even overcome. So maybe you'll have to do it in proxy. You do it for them and give them a report. You can guess. I mean, that's the beauty about it, is you can kind of guess your way through it and leave it anonymous enough that that's a problem that I don't know how I could help you with, unfortunately. Any more questions? Yes, sir, back in the back there.
Yeah, one of the things that one of our challenges is we're kind of in the early stages of cloud adoption with the old 365. And one of our big challenges has been our legal counsel and their concerns, especially in Europe, over privacy, the right to subpoena by government.
Yes. Yeah, a lot of times the question that comes back to is, again, is right to disclosure and right to access. Is it right to access all data, or is there types of data that they're concerned about? And again, comes back to a major concern that I see as a drawback is data classification tends to be missing. So they're saying it's all or nothing, but in reality, it's probably just a sector of data that they're really concerned about. Turns out that most cloud providers can actually attest to and provide you a level of certification that exceeds your ability to do it in-house. And that's, I think, that's an interesting dichotomy, is you try to provision those capabilities in-house. Odds are that a provider has already done it for you, and they're under much heavier scrutiny than you are in-house. The biggest drawback that occurs is where individuals, especially legal and executives, get scared is press. I mean, you see these really high-profile potential exploits or vulnerabilities or downage, or a service outage. Turns out if you actually look at how that organization recovered and survived, and I talked about response behavior, most of these organizations have a very, very robust response and mitigation process, probably one much more effective than yours. So the question I have frequently is, could you have survived better if that would have happened to you? It's true, you're not dealing with quite as much volume, but the reality is that are you able to respond quite as effectively as these organizations? And Amazon's a good example. They've had some major outages, and they were able to recover faster than most organizations can even think about the problem.
Well, the concern is not so much about black hats and hackers and all that stuff. The problem is that you hear the press about the U.S. government has subpoenaed Google Gmail for all this
Right.
information on their clients, and the clients don't know.
And so I hear that concern also. The thing that I'd challenge you is identify an organization that's actually gone through that and come out the backside, because obviously eventually there'll be a disclosure associated with that. Google does disclosure, Microsoft does disclosure on the requests, but take a look at when customer data was requested and granted. And currently, I don't believe that's actually occurred. There's a difference between being requested, and we're not talking about just general data, right? I mean, Google's constantly being requested for information, and as I said, if you look at their list, same with Microsoft. More specifically, when has customer data been requested and the provider granted the data? And currently, and I could be wrong, I'd love to hear otherwise, that hasn't occurred yet. So again, press does a great job of hyping something that is not really the case. And in fact, actually, the other question that comes up is American law versus European laws on disclosure. Turns out that the arcane mechanisms in Europe are much more stringent on being able to access that private data than American laws are. So a little bit of upside is that we're not actually being monitored as much as the Europeans are. Yet. Anything else? All right, well, thank you very much for your time. And if you didn't grab one of these, I have one more shirt here, and you sat in the front, so there you go. It's a small shirt, though.